Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Canadian Electricity Association's Conversation webinar series. CEA is the voice of the electricity industry in Canada. My name is Farhan Mirza, and I'm pleased to be your host for today's session. I'd first like to start by acknowledging that Canada is the land of the First Peoples, Inuit and Métis, and that the land on which I'm broadcasting you from is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. The Algonquin peoples have lived on this land since time immemorial, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to be present in this territory. I would also like to pay homage to the Indigenous peoples, past, present, and future, that continue to work, educate, and contribute to the strength of our country. I would like to recognize that this land is shared through historic treaties, developed through contemporary treaties, and one that continues to be unceded territory. The conversation series features presentations from CEA's corporate partners, and the series will highlight a variety of Canadian and international solutions to current and future challenges faced by our industry. Working with CEA's corporate partners, these webinars have been developed to be of specific interest to those working in the electric utility space, from generation through to the customer. For a list of upcoming sessions, please check out CEA's website at www.electricity.ca. Before we get going, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. Our session today is scheduled to run from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Questions can be asked, and we'd encourage you to do so as they come to mind by typing them into your question function on your screen to your right. We'll ask them at the end of the presentation as time permits. And a brief survey will be sent to webinar participants following the session today. We'd very much appreciate your candid feedback and are interested in any topics you'd like to have covered in the conversation series in the future. And also, please keep an eye out for future webinars and events through CEA's monthly newsletter, Current Affairs. With over 6,000 subscribers, Current Affairs, much like the national newspaper, is the place to go for Canadian industry news as we connect the value chain from generation to the customer. If you'd like to receive Current Affairs, you can subscribe to this free publication by visiting CEA's website again at electricity.ca. Now, today's session, Kaihen will be presenting on Utility Customer Information System, CIS, cloud decision, on-premise versus cloud. In Kaihen's second installment of their CIS series, they address key question that many utilities are currently asking themselves, whether to stay on-premise or to go with the CIS application vendor's cloud offering. Until a couple of years ago, this decision wasn't top of mind for most utilities, but since then, many CIS applications have been offered through different deployment methods such as SaaS or platform as a service. The CIS cloud market is still in its infancy, but a few more years it will become commonplace to go with cloud CIS. So in today's cloud discussion decision, we will hear points of view from other utilities as well as learn more about cloud offerings from CIS application vendors in Canada. So to introduce our two-panel discussion today, I'd like to welcome Pat Leahy, Director of Business Development at Kaihen. Pat, welcome to the conversation series, and I will now turn the webinar over to you.
Thanks, Farhan. Kaihen's very happy to be part of CEA's conversation series, and we look forward to the discussion over the next hour. We will be discussing different types of cloud services. We'll have CIS software vendor panels, as you mentioned, to get the perspectives on the CIS cloud market, and a utility panel to share their key decision factors in evaluating CIS cloud. There'll be a couple of polls, and we'll take questions at the end, as Farhan mentioned, time permitting. The webinar is being recorded and will be shared by the CEA and Kaihen. Just a reminder that this webinar is actually the second webinar in our CIS series. The CIS series was developed by Kaihen to provide insights to utilities that are considering going down the CIS replacement path, have already begun their journey, or have completed their projects and are now looking back at it. Kaihen has worked on many of these projects in Canada, and we're glad to share some of our learnings and points of view and our clients' lessons learned and success stories. You can check out the CIS series webpage for all related content, including information on this topic and our first white paper and webinar on CIS procurement options. Now I will pass things to Jonathan Minsky, President of Kaihen, to facilitate the panel discussions.
Well, thanks, Pat, and welcome everybody. I look forward to having a good discussion today. Let's start by defining what we mean by cloud. For the purpose of our discussion today, we've identified two main types of cloud services, private and public. There are several additional models that exist, including hybrid models, and our software vendor panelists will likely tell us that there are many variations. But to simplify for now, let's focus on these two. So starting with private cloud, which would also be known as platform as a service, single tenant cloud, or hosted cloud. It's when an outside company hosts the infrastructure for a single client to run one or more of their applications. It's when an outside vendor is responsible for runtime, middleware, database, etc. Some examples of private cloud would be Google Cloud Platform, Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and IBM Bluemix. These are also known as hyperscalers. Then if we look at public cloud, also known as software as a service, multi-tenant cloud, or full cloud, this is where all applications, middleware, database, hardware, disaster recovery are all owned and managed by a third party outside of the client's organization and are shared among other clients' technologies. It's usually provided on a subscription basis, and the applications are kept current by the public cloud vendor, so typically no major software upgrades should ever be required. Some examples of public cloud would be Google Business, Microsoft 365, Workday, and Salesforce.com. So let's bring in our CIS software vendor panel. We have 4 vendors joining us for this discussion. Please welcome Stefan Wolf, a member of the executive leadership team, SAP's Global Utility Industry Business Unit. Welcome, Stefan. Christina Schuneman, Director of Product Solutions at Oracle. Hi, Christina. Christophe Van Compernole, Director of Product and Partner Alliances at Itineris. Christophe, and Guy Tennant, Chief Technology Officer at Hansen. Thank you all for joining us today. Let's begin by discussing the broader cloud market for various applications in all industries, then focus on the utility sector cloud market. Then we can move more specifically to customer information systems. So with the rise of services powered by the cloud, such as Amazon, Netflix, and Gmail, it has become widely accepted that cloud technologies are used in our daily lives. Cloud technologies are becoming more and more prominent across all industry sectors and applications. Stefan, can you start by giving us an overview from SAP's perspective as a global cross-industry software provider on the proliferation of cloud broadly in the marketplace?
Yeah, sure. And thank you, Jonathan, for having me on this great panel with Kaihen and being part of the CEA conversation series. It's really great to be here. Yeah, definitely, we at SAP see an increase and actually even an acceleration in the move to cloud, pretty much across all industries, regions, as well as all kinds of business solutions. Actually, so much that as recently as in April, we increased our revenue forecast for this year because we see such a strong move to the cloud. And if we look a little bit closer, we can see that it is not just those cloud solutions which are already well adopted in the past, like supply chain, like human resources solution, or in the customer experience, but even core solutions like ERP are moving strongly to the cloud now for most customers, and in actually really many, if not most, regions out there. As well as even very conservative industries like utilities are moving to the cloud with many applications. But it's also true to say this is not a move for each and every capability out there. There are still reasons why solutions need to stay on premise, and we know, for example, utilities. I mean, they're managing critical infrastructure, they're managing key customer data. So this is still a question which needs to be clarified each and every case when we propose cloud here. But in all intents and purposes, the cloud is dominating right now. And of course, the lockdown measures through the pandemic have even increased that drive to the cloud. because customers see the benefits. And if I may add this one, it is not just to save a couple of dollars in the IT by reducing data center responsibilities out there. It's really to enable transformation by customers go to the cloud, because they see the agility, they see the possibility on focusing on what is core, which is making their business work better, work more efficient, go into new markets, explore new business processes. This is what driving our customers, what we can see, to the cloud.
Excellent. Thank you, Stefan. Focusing more specifically on the utility sector, some of the same cloud trends are occurring here as in other sectors. A recent Oracle study found that 71% of utilities are currently using some cloud software, compared to just 45% in 2016. So clearly more and more utility applications are moving to the cloud. Christina, can you please elaborate on what Oracle is seeing in the utility sector generally regarding moving their applications to the cloud?
Sure, absolutely. And thank you for having us here today for this exciting topic. It's one that's near and dear to my heart. So similar to Stefan, we're just seeing a huge uptick in cloud interest from our utilities globally. And we've been working with utilities for many, many years on their journey into the cloud. And really early on in this journey, utilities were focused on applications that were either at the peripheral of their main core systems, things like mobile work management or self-service, things that were kind of off to the side and non-mission critical. Or they looked at non-utility specific core applications, things like ERP, HCM, and CX. And they were really interested in those because other industries were adopting those faster, and so they had more time to kind of test those out in the field. They were more kind of tried and true, and let's face it, we're not the most innovative, bleeding edge technology industry. We like to really make sure that what we're investing in is stable, that it's not going to impact our ability to provide the services that folks rely on. And so by kind of treading into the waters early on with ERP and HCM and CX, they were able to kind of start to test the waters without worrying about their core infrastructure. And as that kind of happened, utilities are gaining more and more confidence in what the cloud and more specifically SaaS applications have to offer. And in the recent few years, we've just seen the interest explode. And we are taking a SaaS first approach in our investments in our products. And so all of our utility specific mission critical systems, we're investing in the cloud and a SaaS first technology stack. And because we're doing that, we've had a lot of customers be early adopters, and they're out in the market now. They're starting to really reap the benefits. And I think it's important, just like Stefan said, it's not just the benefits of reducing the IT burden. It's really on business agility and being able to get rid of the upgrade cycle and to always be on the latest and greatest version, and to kind of future-proof your solution, so you're always ready for what might happen next. And I think the pandemic was a real eye-opener, and how we have to maybe adapt and shift and change in our spaces, and the flexibility that a cloud offering allows with that. So one of the other things that I've seen a trend in is the size of utilities, right? We started off seeing some of our smaller utilities really interested in a SaaS offering because they were worried about that IT burden, right? And so as they started to adopt, they've went live. We're now seeing some of our largest utilities adopt the cloud first strategy on their mission critical systems. And I'm really excited to say that when we look across our customer solutions, we now have utilities ranging from 1.6 million customers all the way down to about 8,000 customers utilizing or getting prepared to utilize our SaaS solutions. So I love that SaaS is really bringing, this type of solution, these tier 1 capabilities to the entire the market. And I'm excited for what that means in the future for all of our utilities.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Christina. So we know that the CIS public cloud market itself is still in the infancy stage overall. Christoph, can you give us a feel for the demand from utilities, such as how many Itinerus utility customers in North America have chosen to go cloud to date, or what are your growth expectations over the next few years from a CIS cloud perspective?
Sure, Jonathan. Thank you for your question, and thank you for having Itinerus on this panel. I'm really excited to be here, and I'll be happy to share our perspective on this subject. To your question, the last 4 implementations of UMAX have all been SaaS or public cloud, depending on how you call it. The first one of our implementations was back in 2019. And actually, just as it happened, so just this past Memorial Day weekend, we brought one of our newest implementations live for the city of Lansing and in the state of Michigan. The next one will go live over Labor Day weekend, the last week of August. With those implementations, we cover a customer base which ranges from utilities like Cape Fear in North Carolina with about 100,000 customers, all the way up to New York City with just shy of 1 million customers, and even bigger with one of our customers in Europe. Over the past couple of years, there hasn't been a single RFP which didn't ask about SaaS, or at least asked about it as an option. So the interest and openness to cloud delivered solutions is definitely gaining traction as far as we can see. And this also matches the trend we see globally. For instance, some of our longer standing customers in Europe have started a migration from their on-prem solution to a cloud-based solution. We expect that this trend will continue and even accelerate together with the increased awareness and familiarity, and also when there is a critical mass of successful projects in the industry from the early adopters. Every customer we are engaged with is asking about the cloud, or is at least asking about the possibility to migrate to the cloud at some later point. So we see a lot of momentum, and we expect that this will continue for the foreseeable future.
That's great. Thank you, Christoph. Guy, what are some of the hurdles currently that Hansen is seeing for utilities as they assess whether or not to move their CIS to the cloud?
Thank you for including me. It's a very good and pertinent question. And to address it directly, when I first started engineering, I had a head of engineering, a German guy, who used to say to me, "All that glitters is not gold." And what he was basically saying is, you know, you're seeing shiny toys here. They don't necessarily make sense included, because cool stuff doesn't necessarily mean a cool outcome. I think the really important thing when you look at going to cloud is to make sure that you're absolutely clear what it is that you're trying to achieve. And that means tangible ROI, real benefits. That means thinking through what the implications are for potentially your IT team downsizing, if that's how you're ultimately going to realize changes, and what it means for your organizational culture when you become fully dependent on contracts driven by SLAs and external vendors, rather than having capability to somewhat address it yourself. These are really important things to think about up front, because, you know, with billions of dollars being spent on public cloud technology by, you know, the likes of Amazon and Azure and so on, it's very easy to be caught up in the sort of a hype of it. But you really do need to think through exactly what it means for your organization. So usually what we find is when our customers say they want to go to cloud, what they're really talking about is they want a lower total cost of ownership. And that lower cost of ownership may involve some decisions that they make long-term about their own costs of serving technology within their organizations. You know, that's one part. Another reason why people go to cloud a lot is because of scalability or resiliency concerns. And there you've also got to think through, I mean, resiliency is relatively easy to achieve with cloud, with a distributed environment. The scalability aspect, you've got to think through what really drives scale in your business. Is it your invoicing cycles? Are they kind of monthly? So therefore, do you want granularity of kind of microservices at invoicing level, so you can add lots of them during that busy period and then fall back. So make sure that your vendors actually have the ability to give you the cost savings that might come with some of the scalability. And then another reason why people want to go to cloud is greater agility. The cloud offers, in principle, the promise of having regular releases automatically updated. Well, is your organization set up to actually take advantage of rapid release cycles? If you're actually managing the cloud relationship yourself, are you as an organization in a position to run a development operations kind of continuous integration, continuous delivery tool chain? Because if you're not sort of set up to do that, and if you're not going to if you're not going to sort of realize that, you won't end up with the agility that you expect. So I think these are kind of like key things. I mean, our advice in general to people is, and if you haven't done this, I believe this is the right way to get into it, is get some experience. And really, it often happens, as previous panelists have said, of some distributed service that is somewhat peripheral. Like it might be, for instance, a self-care application that is cloud-based, which will give you some insight into how these contracts work and how they interoperate with your on-prem software. So get experience dealing with with cloud models. Seek vendors who offer an evolutionary path. I mean, you've spent a lot of money, you invested a lot of money in making your CIS highly pertinent to your marketplace, and often that's really regulatory compliance. Well, if you start again from scratch, that's quite painful. So is there a way, is there an evolutionary pathway towards cloud if you want it? And then just to touch two other things, the way it's packaged and the way that your deployment models work, and the way the vendor is providing consistent operational tools are all key things to understand up front, because having a lot of different operational tools and metrics and telemetry that doesn't kind of hang together becomes a separate sort of integration nightmare if you haven't basically mandated what cloud technology means to your organization and what you expect out of it. So I think those are the key things that we'd probably identify as things worth considering, and the obstacles to successful deployment.
Thank you, Guy. Appreciate that. Let's do a brief overview now of the current on-premise, private cloud, and/or public cloud CIS solutions in the marketplace today from each of you. And this is a chart that we had in our white paper. So let's just, if you can, maybe let's spend 2 minutes at the most going through each of the different solutions here. Starting with Hanson. Guy, please give us an overview of your various CIS platforms.
Sure. I mean, we have a variety of CIS platforms, and they're not just CIS. They're also things like metadata management systems and the peripheral, the meter to cache kind of chain. The Hanson started actually as a hosting company, so we do have, kind of in our DNA, we have running data centers. We still operate a number of data centers, and therefore the kind of private cloud where essentially we've invested in a continuous integration, continuous delivery tool chain, packaging like Dockerization of our software so you can install it quickly, and the orchestration of that, which is kind of like Kubernetes kind of tools that allow you to spool up lots of services or spool them down. Those are things we provide whether out of our own data centers or potentially out of the public cloud. And in a way, it's really just a decision about where an operator is best served. If we have a way from our own data centers to provide private cloud, we would provide that as an alternative. But if what people wanted was full use of AWS, or if they wanted to hold the AWS account and essentially have us operate within their account, those are deployment options that we provide. But by far the majority of our CIS offerings are essentially on-premise, and the process of sort of migrating to cloud is to turn them into distributed services and move some of those services onto the cloud by maintaining API compatibility. This is the process we're on now, all of our solutions can be offered in that way. But not all of our solutions are cloud native. And by cloud native, I mean they fully use the kind of technologies you find on the public cloud. There, we are making investment over time. We have a meter data management system that's 100% cloud native, but we don't have any CIS that is 100% cloud native at this point. But all of them can be offered under software as a service models or platform as a service models.
I see.
Essentially, is how we think about it.
Great. Okay, well, thanks, Guy. Christoph, how does that compare to Itinerus's CIS offerings?
Yeah, sure. With Itinerus, we only focus on the utility sector. So the only system we make is a CIS system. As some of you might know, our system is called UMAX, and UMAX is built on top of Microsoft Dynamics 365. Our solution from the inception has been deployment agnostic. We only support on-prem and public cloud. We don't have a private cloud option. But our deployment has been, or our system is deployment agnostic. We can just as easily deploy in an on-prem fashion as we can in a public cloud approach. Since we first started with our SaaS solution, we have made conscious decisions and investments to make our solution available in both deployment models. And as such, we don't really offer a traditional on-prem solution, but instead, we deliver a single tenant solution where all customers, not just the on-prem ones, all customers share a single code base and receive in a regular cadence updates, not major updates. So the on-prem customers still get the same product and experience as the SaaS customers, and for the most part, the same technology stack. So the on-prem customers get some of the benefits of the SaaS solution, but they remain in control for the infrastructure. Other than that, there's really no difference in functionality, feature set, or capabilities, really. As a matter of fact, our customer in Boston runs the on-prem version of our software, and he enjoys the exact same features and updates as our cloud customers. There's no difference. And since we offer the same solution on-prem and in the cloud, we technically have the ability to shift a solution from the cloud to on-prem. And in such a case, the accounting rules of some of the jurisdictions allow the utility to capitalize on our cloud subscriptions. So this helps, in some cases, the decision in favor of a cloud solution. And also, this fallback option to shift it from the cloud back to on-prem if needed, this fallback option also provides additional comfort for those utilities who are just starting in their cloud journey. So that's a little bit how our two deployment models compare to one another.
Great, thank you, Christoph. Christina, how about the Oracle CIS on-premise, private, and public cloud solutions? I think you're on mute, Christina.
I knew I would do that, right? Somebody had to do that.
Right.
So similar to Itinerus, our core solution, the code base is the same, whether it's on-prem or SaaS. One of the big differences is in the deployment methodology. So if you're SaaS, you get the new features and functions sooner, faster, and with a regular cadence. So they're coming down every 4 months or so. What is very different between our private cloud and on-premise deployment options versus, our true SaaS options are all of the tools and functionalities that come and surround the solutions, right? Our SaaS offerings come with automated testing, a really specialized analytics platform that's enabled through cloud technology that comes with pre-configured dashboards, ready to go reporting that's right out of the box. I know we're short on time, but another area that I think is so important to highlight with our SaaS offerings, each offering comes with a customer success manager. And these success managers only are responsible for a handful of accounts, not hundreds of accounts. So they get to know our customers intimately. And they're there every single step of the way to ensure that as new features, new functions are coming down, the customer is ready for them, they understand how they operate in their business, and that they can take those on to really enable that business agility as it comes down. So it's a kind of a very different mindset of how our SaaS offering kind of works and functions versus our on-premise offering. So I guess those would be kind of big differences.
Thank you, Christina. That's great. And Stefan, from your perspective, SAP.
Yeah, sure. And I'll be running a little bit out of time, so let me try to make this short, even though that is not something SAP is usually associated with. And if I look back at your definition of private versus public cloud at the beginning, John, yeah, I would think what we at SAP call private cloud, you call public cloud. So in that sense, yeah, we are offering these three options here to the utilities, and we see it is not so much about, okay, do we want to go cloud, and then we have a different set of requirements. No, so they have the same business processes to accomplish. Big or small utilities, it's meter to cash, it's maintain your assets, it is serving the customer. But we do see that there are different expectations from different types of utilities. Whether you are a competitive retailer versus a fully integrated utility, you have different types of business to satisfy. And so we're trying to satisfy these needs in the various different deployment options out there. As a utility today, you can run our solution on-premise in what you call private cloud, which is kind of a managed environment, or you can subscribe to it, consume the application as you go. So you have this in a public cloud environment. Obviously, if you look down into CIS, this is today not just a billing system. There are metering systems in there, there are customer service system portals in there, and so forth. Many of those today are regularly used in a public cloud environment, no matter what is done for the billing system out there. So we're trying to also play to these needs in the utility. Also from a roadmap perspective, you start at one end of your utilities landscape, go to the cloud maybe with some, stay on premise for a while. So you have this hybrid option out there. But we are also trying really to accomplish an end-to-end public cloud flexible solution, is in particularly for the complexity of the utilities business in the future. We see more and more different market entrants. We see more and more re-regulation. If you look at California and so forth, you don't have to deregulate to make it complicated for utilities. So to provide that flexibility of a public cloud to serving utilities in this changing business environment.
Well, great. Thank you, Stefan. And also thank you, Christina, Christoph, Guy, and to our CIS software vendor panel. Very much appreciate all of your time today. We're now going to move to our, thank you. We're now going to move to our first poll. And let's get a pulse on where the audience is at this time. If you can select one of the following, would you move your utility CIS to the public cloud at this time? Yes, maybe in the future, or never. And we'll see if the first poll impacted your initial opinion on the matter. Okay, the results are in. We've got 53% saying yes and 47% maybe in the future, and nobody said no. So I think that says a lot. We're all thinking about the cloud, either now or not quite ready, but maybe in the future. That's great, thank you. So let's now move to our utility panel and get the point of view from the utility. I'm pleased to welcome Kevin Neild, Chief Customer Officer and SVP IT at Metergy Solutions. Welcome, Kevin. And John Lowson, VP Transition Management and IT at Liberty Utilities. Thank you both for joining us today. Let's start with Kevin. Metergy is currently in the midst of upgrading its CIS solution and moving it to the cloud. Kevin, can you tell us about why Metergy chose to go with a public cloud solution, and what were some of the key factors that in your decision making?
Yeah, so thanks, Jonathan. So just some context. So Metergy, we would be classified, just hearing the software providers speak, we would probably classified in that small to medium-sized utility. We're roughly 150,000 customers, about 300,000 meters installed, so, and continue to grow exponentially. So we're in that kind of, you know, called small to middle space as well. We're running a bit of older systems, kind of 2012-ish. So, you know, time is now. We had to do something. And I'm going to be honest with you, and this is, you know, I got some notes here from when the other panelists spoke. When we looked at this, you know, there's two factors. There's the macro environment and then the micro environment. So firstly, on the macro environment, we were looking at the maturity of the product. So when we kicked this off back in 2018, to be honest, we were looking on-prem. We just didn't feel the products were there yet. And Christoph mentioned 2019, they had their first implementation on SaaS. So, you know, fast forward, here we are, we're 2020, 2021. We did decide to go cloud because we felt they were mature enough, and we didn't necessarily want to be the first person, but we've seen enough advances, enough projects kicking down to go there. So, so we looked at maturity of products. The other macro factor, just as our organization as a whole, we are going to cloud first. So that was another thing we wanted to move off as much as we can from a data-centric point of view. The micro factors we looked at, it is, you know, for the most part, business case related. So we did look at total cost of ownership and all those items within, you know, disaster recovery, you know, security, patching, you know, we start getting into hardware cycles, so that when you have a data center and you have an on-prem solution, you start getting into, okay, my hardware is a different cycle than my software. I got OS patches I have to worry about. Actually, I have to patch the application. And there's some complexities just managing 2 or 3, 4, 5 different vendors as well, as opposed to a SaaS where you're really turning over the keys. You're tightly coupled with the partner or the software provider there. The other thing we looked at, so cost of ownership was one big element. Feature updates. So I think Christina mentioned that it's that continual update, much like, you know, we all have iPhones or Google phones. You know, you're getting those continuous updates as well. Throughout the pandemic, like everybody, we use Microsoft Teams in my organization. It seemed every time I logged in, there'd be a little feature, things that changed. So do I want to disrupt my business like that? No, but it's nice to know those features are available for us to use, and we don't have to do, you know, kind of swallow that big pig every 5 to 8 years with a major upgrade. So we did look at that. And then the last point, both Guy and Christina did mention this. It was actually the skill set of the team. We wanted to start focusing on being, how do we add value to the customers? How do we kind of start, you know, being more competitive with our IT environment? And we wanted to get away with being infrastructure and having that, you know, data centric, and kind of be honest, just those kind of services that are starting to be commoditized, and get the team to more focused on, well, how do we squeeze more out of this solution? How do we become, you know, better using the application? You know, how can we take the application, solve our business problems as well? So that's kind of the last point I want to make, is it's the value add. Let's get out of the kind of infrastructure. There's a lot of great companies that actually are experts in that. Outsource that piece and really focus on having our skills and staff around the application.
Perfect, thanks, Kevin. That gives us a really good understanding. Liberty is also undergoing significant changes with its utility solutions, and have chosen a hybrid cloud model for its CIS and other applications. John, can you share with us the model that Liberty has chosen and your reasoning behind that decision?
Sure. Thanks, Jonathan, and hello to everyone. Hopefully this is interesting and useful to you, to those listening. So again, a bit of context. Liberty is a Canadian headquartered company. We own around 11 utility distribution systems across the US and Canada in water, gas, and electric. And they range in size from smallest being around 20,000 customer connections, the largest being about 200,000 customer connections. We've grown by acquisition, so we've sort of collected a menagerie of all sorts of interesting legacy systems. So our project was really to consolidate onto a modern single instance. And it's very significant scope. So it's not just a CIS, it includes all the financial, most of the HR, work, asset management, as well as all the customer facing functions. So very, very significant scope. So we started with the software selection, and this similar to what Kevin was describing. I mean, this was really 3 years ago when we were focused on the software. I mean, I would say that we looked, you know, we wanted a tier 1 product that our regulators would feel very comfortable allowing us cost recovery on. Obviously, we had a very significant scope, so we had to make sure that we had a good solution that gave us good functional coverage. And to be honest, it was very, you know, the biggest driving factor for us was really the risk associated with the implementation. So it mattered to us for there to be a very, very strong, mature implementer or integrator marketplace which really was around minimizing the risks associated with a very large fixed price implementation. So we chose SAP, and I hesitate to talk about SAP with Stefan on the phone here, so he may jump in and correct anything that I say that's not really correct. But certainly at the time that we chose SAP, the core of SAP, those that know it, the old kind of ECC or ISU, now is S4HANA. That is the current version of that certainly is viable from our perspective, is, if you like, traditional on-premise perpetually licensed software. There are a large number of the components of our solution that sit around that core that are software as a service. So what we did from an implementation decision point of view with respect to the hosting, we RFP'd for an implementer who would also host the core SAP for us. So you can really think of that component of it, I think, kind of like a platform. The services that sit around just running applications on a server somewhere, all the monitoring and security and so on, really come from, in our case, IBM. If you like, you could call it sort of platform as a service, I guess. And then obviously integration into all of the software as a service components. So I think, you know, our choice was based on risk. I think where it gets interesting in the context of this conversation is, you know, SAP is moving functionality into a true SaaS solution from what historically would have been perpetually licensed. So there were some components of the solution at the time that we were making the decision, probably most notably the CRM component, where there was really a choice to be made as to do we go with the on-prem version or do we go with the software as a service? And we would always go with the software as a service. We would always go where the product is going, assuming that we could satisfy ourselves that, you know, we weren't going to be on the absolute bleeding edge of that change. So actually, I mean, you know, quite significant set of the functionality is software as a service, analytics cloud, C for service. There's a whole bunch of components. Again, with the core of it being, you know, perpetually licensed, single tenant, on-prem.
Right. Interesting. Thanks, John. Clearly a complex project and road ahead for you guys. Kevin, I want to follow up on, you mentioned business case and total cost of ownership. Wondering if you can expand a little bit more on that, kind of what you did and why that either supported or didn't support as much your decision to go cloud.
Yeah, so great question. So one of the aspects when you're looking at total cost of ownership, you had to pick a time horizon. So we looked at the time horizon and said, you know what, we're just going to block it. We did a 10-year time horizon. Now, so maybe that's too short. You could say 20, because some of these systems can last that long. We did a 10-year time horizon. We actually went back to the software provider who is on the call, by the way, they said, oh, in that time frame, you should be upgrading you should be upgrading twice every 4 or 5 years. I'm like, okay, so 2012, it's 2020. I should have done that twice already. No, not a chance. So we ran the numbers with two upgrade cycles in the actual, and we picked one. We said, let's just do what we've done in the past. Every 6 or 7 years, you start thinking about you do it. So we built that into the upgrade. So over 10 years, you're going to do one major upgrade and whatever that cost is. The other thing you start backing out is all the infrastructure stuff. I don't need security patches. I don't need that. So you're backing that out of the SaaS model, or you're adding it to your on-prem model or PaaS. We did look at the PaaS solution as well. Said, you know what? Maybe we don't want to have our data center. Maybe actually we'll outsource. We'll go to PaaS or even the IaaS. So we looked at that as well. So we started to take a, I don't need infrastructure people. I don't need security people. I don't need to do patches. So we looked at that. Lo and behold, like the biggest cost, yes, SaaS may be a bit more expensive, annually, but it's that one big implementation cost that you have to swallow every 6 or 7 years, which really tips the scale to the SaaS solution. And I'm assuming all the vendors on the call would also say, that's part of their sales solution is that you constantly stay up to date as well. So even you're doing micro updates, I think the product we're with, it's every 4 months there's a release. And so we're already an agile development shop. Our team is doing those releases. So we've already prepped for that. So these micro releases, we may not take the functionality. We just got to make sure it doesn't break anything we have.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that, Kevin. John, you mentioned that Liberty, although it's a Canadian company, most of your customers are in the US. Wonder if we can talk about, from a regulatory perspective, was regulatory treatment of capital investments for cloud solutions or the model that you've described, is that a hurdle in the US?
Yeah, I mean, good question. In this, I would say not really in the scheme of things. I mean, I know that people get very sort of wrapped around the axle on that point. And again, I'm not an accountant, so I'm trusting that what we're doing is is appropriate. But I mean, the software costs, the implementation costs, really dwarf the software costs. You can capitalize the software costs incurred during implementation. So the difference in your expense is really the difference between, once you're live, between the ongoing, what would be, expensible kind of maintenance costs, support and maintenance costs on perpetually licensed software versus the SaaS costs. And obviously the difference, as Kevin's been pointing out, is associated with how the infrastructure is provisioned. So from our point of view, the bit of lost capitalization under the current rules associated with the infrastructure is really not a big enough, is not a big enough financial concern to outweigh all the other considerations, which I think Kevin did a nice job of describing. Obviously, all those benefits of kind of avoided upgrade costs, avoided infrastructure management, and so on. So, from our point of view, the short of it is, was not in any way a determining factor in our project. I mean, I think, obviously there are jurisdictions in the US. I mean, Illinois specifically came pretty close to basically completely leveling the playing field. I think that will happen ultimately, but in the scheme of a project like a CIS implementation, I don't see it as a big factor. I mean, it actually is more of a factor for things like Microsoft Office, because of because you don't have the implementation cost differential. But apart from anything else, I mean, I would never go against the grain of the software vendor for a few bucks. That would be crazy. You got to go with the grain of your software vendor.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. Good perspective there. Thank you. We've got time for one more question. Kevin, I'll ask you. Do you think change management, and when I say that, organizational change, cultural readiness, the people impact, should that be taken into account in your CIS cloud decision, or is that something that you need to account for it in the project and the implementation?
Yeah, I agree. And then, I'll be fairly quick because John probably has a bit of perspective on this, and John put you on the spot. But just given you have different different utilities in different jurisdictions. So, organizational impact. So one of the key factors in going to a cloud base, and everybody who goes on a journey, any type of major ERP, CIS, CRM, you want to keep on base. But more importantly, when you're on the cloud solution, you really got to stay on base. You got to change your business processes to really mirror what the system wants you to do. And that's more important. The more user exits you have or configs, the more testing you have to do, the more difficult it would be to take those things. So that's one thing, we've been coaching the team on. We have to replace 2 MDM systems. We've grown by acquisition as well. So those things are going to go away. So there's going to be some changes there. And what the team has to get around, and we've been coaching them along the way, is you have to look at your business processes to what the system wants you to do. It's not the other way around. You don't get a clean sheet and say, okay, tell us your business requirements, tell us your process. Okay, we'll design the system that way. You actually have to use it out of the box. So that's one of the things we are that's our compass pointing north throughout the entire implementation is do what the product wants you to do. And if it's a major flaw in our business process, let's chat. Maybe we'll do a user exit. Maybe we'll do some type of exit there, but let's really minimize those. And sorry, John, you're going multiple jurisdictions, but I imagine you're trying to get everyone on a similar platform. So you probably have a lot of those nuances as well.
Yeah, and I mean, it's we have the benefit of taking most people from sort of somewhere in the 1980s into at least into the 2000s. So the benefit to the user of kind of a modern functional system is so outweighs any other considerations.
That's right. Yeah.
And by the way, I mean, we just went live with our first release. So out of the 11 utilities that I described, just about coming up on 4 weeks ago, we went live in our gas utility in Massachusetts. So, I mean, we have kind of real experience here to base this on, and it's gone really well. And one thing, I mean, I imagine that a lot of people already know this, but SAP today, even compared to a typical SAP implementation not that many years ago, the level of reporting, kind of analytics, dashboards is so much better than it used to be. And it's you don't have to you have to do some level of configuration, I guess, but it's pretty light. And that, again, has just kind of blown away our users. Now, again, they are going from circa 1980, so you would expect them to be happy. But yeah, I don't think there's really any particular change management considerations. It's all about the functionality of the solution. I mean, the users don't know. Like, the users could not tell the difference in terms of, is it software as a service? Is it hosted somewhere? So again, I certainly wouldn't regard that as a significant decision factor.
That's great. That's great. Well, Kevin and John, thank you both so much for joining our utility panel. Very much appreciate it. Let's do another quick poll. So our second poll here is, what are the top 2 most important factors influencing your decision to move your CIS to the cloud? Operational, technical, security, financial, and regulatory. Kevin and John talked about many of these. Our vendor panel also touched on several of these. From an audience perspective, what are the top 2 most important factors? Okay, time is up, and the results are operational factors are the top of mind for the group. Security being second, financial, technical, and regulatory. So that's interesting. You know, my expectation has been, and you know, in talking to clients, that regulatory is a hurdle. And you know, after talking through this with our panels, you know, it's a factor, but it's not necessarily the most important factor. So excellent. Thank you, everybody, for responding to that. Farhan, I'll pass it back to you. Hopefully we have time for a question or two.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jonathan, for moderating that into our two panels. That was a really good discussion. Actually, we were getting some comments from the audience that they appreciated that conversation very much. So we are low on time for questions, but I will prompt everybody to come on camera, and I'll ask a quick question of each panel if we can get through those, and then we'll wrap up here at the top of the hour. So perhaps I'll start off with the vendor panel first. So first for Stefan, perhaps, how are your SAP clients dealing with regulatory hurdles in their jurisdictions? And we're talking about regulatory hurdles right now. Any good lessons that you learned that you might be able to share?
Yeah, and thanks, John, for making a pitch here for us. Now, you certainly did things very right here. I mean, John and Liberty is a good example for that one. You want to have a platform where you can build out your regulatory requirements from a cloud perspective. Since I mean, this is about the decision cloud versus on-premise. I mean, the business regulations obviously still apply. This doesn't change. The regulatory aspect to cloud on top of this is, and we saw it, I think, now in the survey, security. Can the vendor provide the necessary security to keep the data, public data, customer data, infrastructure data safe and secure? Because the utility is trusting the vendor here. And I think we as a vendor community doing actually a good job to provide that. We do this as a business, we do this as a profession to guarantee this on top of building the regulatory aspect into the business solutions. And again, I think we already honed in on the regular updates in the cloud. This allows us to be even faster with reacting to changes in regulation, which are coming faster and faster. I think that is a common theme now and getting more complex out there. So I believe these three aspects, the platform to build out the specific regulatory requirements you have, the vendor-based security of the cloud solutions, as well as the quick updates help here with regulatory requirements.
Excellent. Thanks, Stefan. We'll ask one last question. Do you expect, anybody can take that, do you expect the implementation time and complexity to change with the CIS cloud implementation? And if so, why and by how much?
Any of the vendors want to jump in on this?
Yeah. Sure. Was that open to anyone?
Yeah. Anybody can take that, yeah.
Okay, sure. I'll take that one. So I think it depends very much on the utility themselves, right? The implementations change a little bit when you go to a cloud implementation, specifically SaaS, because hopefully our customers are focused on going back to basic standardization and not customization. But that requires a whole lot of change management on the customer side. So while from a technical standpoint, we could probably really shorten the implementation timeframe utilizing SaaS, there's the customer aspect of it where it's really, there's a ton around change management, digging in to understand how you do things today and what is really the best practice going forward. And so that does tend to add a little bit of time, and you want to make sure that you're getting that right and that you're taking the time to set those policies up front and to really look at change and embrace change, and that just takes a little bit more time in an implementation. I don't think it's certainly no longer than a traditional implementation, but because of that difference, you know, it adds a bit of time, if that makes sense.
That's great. Thank you very much. So that is all the time we have today. Great conversation, Pat. I'll leave it to you. Any final remarks from you before we wrap up here?
Well, yeah, great. I really appreciated the conversation, and just on behalf of Kaihen, we'd really like to thank the panelists for such a great discussion, and obviously the participants for joining us today. As we mentioned, we'll share the slides and recording over the next few days. We, as part of the Kaihen CIS series, we are aiming to release our next white paper by the end of the year, so stay in tune with that. And if we didn't get to your questions, which we likely did not, we will follow up by an email. And, obviously we look forward to seeing you at more conversation series events and CIS series events. So again, on behalf of Kaihen, thanks again. And I'll leave this with you, Farn.
Thank you very much, Pat, and for that presentation. Before we wrap up, I'll just want to remind the audience of our upcoming webinars. On June 10th, we have Redline Communications, who's going to be presenting on industrial grade wireless networks. On June 16th, we're going to have Utilisys present on how AI-powered analytics is helping utilities unlock the value of AMI. All of CEA's future events and webinars can be found in our monthly newsletter, again, Current Affairs, or you can go to our news and events section on our website at electricity.ca. In closing, again, I would once again like to thank Kaihen and both panelists for joining us, as well as Jonathan for moderating. And this concludes today's session. Everybody stay safe. We'll talk to you next time. Bye for now.